Gokigenyo! Holy shit, this game. I love the original World Ends With You. It's so weird and abstract from top to bottom, which gives it a special kind of vibe. It's also super niche because of its gimmicks, so I never expected it to get a sequel, and I had made peace with that. I pretty much all but verbally accepted that The World Ends With You would be relegated to Kingdom Hearts crossover duty. So frankly, I was really surprised when Square Enix revealed a brand new game in the series, Neo: The World Ends With You. Does this sequel invoke the same unconventional energy that made the original so uniquely great? There's only one way to find out. Normally I try to do spoiler-free reviews, but given that this is a sequel, some spoilers for the original title are inevitable. If you'd like to avoid any spoilers, this is your chance to click away. While we give those viewers some time to do that, why not subscribe and click the bell to get updates on all my new content, and check out my other uploads to see more Square Enix videos. Alright, if you're here right now, then don't say I didn't warn you. Let the games begin! This review is based on physical, retail releases played on the PlayStation 5 and Nintendo Switch.
Oh, Linda! Aeta!
Set after the events of The World Ends With You Final Mix, Neo follows new player Rindo Kanade as he gets dragged into a Reaper game with his friend named Fred. Rindo discovers he has the ability to jump back in time to correct his mistakes, and he uses this secret ability to tackle the trials ahead. Let's get the big detail out of the way right now. Square Enix purported before launch that Neo would feature a story that could be enjoyed without having played the original game.
That was a fucking lie.
To be fair, it's probably halfway true, but I don't have that frame of reference because I played the first game. I think you could follow a fair bit of what's going on in Neo without knowing the events of the original, but much of the subtext would be lost. For instance, one of the actual first things you do in Neo is meet a major character from The World Ends With You. What the fuck? I thought this was supposed to be standalone. That's not to dunk on Neo's story, by the way. I may have cooled a bit on the internally monologuing, detached main character shtick in the decade and a half since The World Ends With You was released because I'm not 15 anymore, but I thought Rindo was a good character to anchor the story, and I like the changes made with the narrative structure to befit the modernization done elsewhere. If you know The World Ends With You, if you know Tetsuya Nomura, then you know what's in store, and it's the same polarizing style that Nomura has flaunted elsewhere throughout his career. I don't want to say more because I don't want to spoil the narrative, so all I'll say is that I, a fan of the first game, liked the story. Now let's get into the thick of it. Dude, this game looks incredible, especially on Switch handheld. One of the first things that drew me to The World Ends With You was the art and aesthetic, and Neo delivers on that front too, albeit in a much different way. Back in 2007, there weren't a whole lot of games that were set in Tokyo in my experience, real or otherwise. Yakuza is a good example, Jet Set Radio was good, Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, but that turns into post-apocalyptic territory pretty quickly. So The World Ends With You felt really cool to me. Nowadays, Tokyo games are a dime a dozen, from the Persona 5 sub-series to literally Tokyo Mirage Sessions, and hey, Yakuza team at Ryugakuto Studio is still crushing it. So Neo: The World Ends With You has a much steeper hill to climb than its predecessor in order to stand out. And I think it does a nice job at bringing the series' art style into the modern era. The manga panel cutscenes look great and are more dynamic than the cutscenes seen in Scarlet Nexus. The pre-renders all look great, no surprise there. And the in-game graphics are really good. I love some of the aesthetic choices made for Neo. For instance, backgrounds do interesting perspective warping, as if they were art pieces on a wall or a canvas. And Neo did well at translating the original game's fantastic 2D sprite work into a 3D format. It could use a touch of anti-aliasing, but I think it's a visually pleasing game on any platform. If I may get technical for a bit, performance is pretty steady too. PS5 backwards compatibility runs at 4K 60, while Switch docked is 1080p 30. Switch Portable is obviously lesser at 720p 30, but the combination of the tablet size and the art style makes the graphics really pop. The Switch version has some mild framerate problems throughout, and they do become more pronounced towards the tail end of the game. This does affect playability, but I found its impact to be minimal, so I didn't think it was invasive to the experience. I've definitely seen worse, even recently. Also, load times are slower on Nintendo Switch, but nothing too bad individually, just a few extra seconds. I'm generally pleased with how the game runs on both Nintendo Switch and PlayStation. And now it's time for the obvious visual comparisons, starting with handheld footage. Man, if you're a predominantly portable Switch player, Neo looks absolutely fantastic on the tablet. Moving right along to docked footage, the art design is doing a lot of the heavy lifting on Switch, handheld or otherwise, but it still looks really good. And we'll cap it off with PlayStation 5 backwards compatibility. Of course, this looks great. I'm still most impressed by the Switch tablet medium, but 4K obviously pulls its weight. In terms of a purely visual experience, you can't go wrong with getting Neo on any platform. It goes without saying, but you can't do The World Ends With You without great music. In a series where enemies are called noise and mechanics have names like groove and remix, you know the audio design is really important. So it's only fitting that Square Enix brought Takaharu Ishimoto back into the fray for Neo, and he hasn't missed a beat. There were a bunch of throwback tracks to the first game, functionally and literally, and Neo's music feels like the most logical continuation of the series' score. Voice acting has been hit and miss for the series, depending on the individual playing the game. I thought the performances were good in Neo, but I also kinda just glazed over most of it because I read faster than they talk.
Anyway, I had to line up for a little something I've had my eye on.
Okay.
Well, don't you want to know what I bought?
Not really.
Oh, you're killing me. Give me a guess.
Fine. Clothes?
Bzz, nope.
Bummer.
Come on, work with me here.
Fine. What is it?
Hint, there's one for each of us.
Some kind of food?
Ta-da!
What is it?
A Reaper pin, duh!
どうしても買いたいものあって並んでたんだわ。気になる。
いや
もっと気にしてみようよ。
じゃあ服
違うね。もっと気にしようか。
じゃあなんだよ
林道の分もある。
食い物
死神バージ。
何それ
流行ってんの知んない？
For what it's worth, I thought the English and Japanese voice acting was fine when I heard it. But the real make or break of Neo for most players is gonna be the gameplay. The overworld controls are the most straightforward translation. You still explore Shibuya, albeit through larger, more contiguous districts. There are still shops and restaurants that you can patron to buy equipable clothes, usable pins, and stat-boosting meals. You can still scan your surroundings by pressing R on Switch or R1 on PlayStation, which allows you to read people's minds and get into combat encounters with noise. You can still chain together multiple noise reductions to increase your victory yield. And there's some new stuff too, like the Social Network tab. Here you can spend friendship points to earn bonus items and permanent upgrades. Party members each have a special ability, like imprinting thoughts on an NPC, or reminding someone of an important detail they forgot, or diving into people's minds to silence rogue noise. And of course, there's the time travel ability, which adds some fun puzzle gameplay to complement the combat. And combat is where Neo differs most heavily from its predecessor. The sequel turns the series into an action JRPG, and in the most literal of senses, it works. Unlike the original game, Neo's Reaper game is built on teams, meaning you'll have access to more party members simultaneously during combat. You still have a ton of equipable pins, each with different implementations, and there's a meter that depletes as you expend that pin. Once the pin is exhausted, you have to wait for it to recharge until you can attack with that pin again. Grooves are Neo's combo system. By chaining together your pin abilities, you can inflict greater damage to your opponent and gradually increase the groove meter at the top. At 100%, you can use a special killer remix attack, which I sadly didn't find to be all that useful or impressive. There's also a dodge button, which I forgot about for half the game, but it became useful towards the latter half. The first of many issues I have with the gameplay is the camera. You don't control the camera in or out of combat, and this brings all the long-standing issues that fixed camera angles have always had. Running away from noise encounters while trying to build up a large reduction and then having the camera angle change on you suddenly so you have to reorient yourself, it's pretty annoying. And it can be frustrating in combat too, especially in those tighter corners where the camera can be obstructed. But the central complaint I have with Neo is the core gameplay. It's just kind of there. A big part of what made The World Ends With You so intriguing to me was that it was so flagrantly, shamelessly against the grain. And yet somehow, despite, or perhaps because of these aberrant qualities, it ended up being beloved by those who played it, myself included. Neo doesn't quite ignite the same feverish fandom in me. It has the makings of what I loved from the first game, numerous combat pins with differing mechanical implementations, the overarching Japanese counterculture vibe. Even Tetsuya Nomura's character designs with emphasis on Tokyo streetwear is ever present. but it's all just set dressing for a game that already had the impossible task of sequelizing The World Ends With You. No matter what pins I was using, I still ultimately ended up just mashing my way through every battle with relative ease. That only became more true once I realized I could just use every single party member's attack at the same time by gripping my controller with some kind of weird claw hand. Then, because of how easily I was breezing through battles, I ended up wildly overpowered, regularly doing missions where the recommended level was some 10 or 20 levels beneath me. And you get more party members as you advance through the game, so my controller claw grip became progressively more unhinged as I pushed through the story. But the end result was still pretty much the same. I just mashed all the buttons until the game said I won. And that's a huge disappointment to me, because I loved the gameplay of the original. Maybe I'm weird because I never hated touchscreen controls like a lot of other people I've talked to, but compared to the first game, Neo was just way more mindless. I was legitimately bored every time I fought enemies. I get that Neo is multi-platform, and it wouldn't be possible to play Neo with touch controls because it wouldn't be fun or even probable. I'm not bashing the sequel for not playing like the original. But at least in other action RPGs like Ys, there are multiple different types of special attacks to change up your regular combo. In Neo, each person's attack is mapped to a single button, and you just alternate button presses, or holding and releasing a button, or doing what I did and just doing all of it at once, intermittently releasing held buttons and mashing everything else until you win. It really was a much duller process to me than, say, Final Fantasy VII Remake, another action JRPG from Tetsuya Nomura. I don't even think I would enjoy Neo's combat if I never played The World Ends With You, because my problem with the sequel's gameplay is that it's bland, which is a wholly independent issue. And I think that's the biggest bummer of all, because the rest of Neo has stuff I really enjoy. I still love the visuals, the art style, the fashion, the music, the story, the fact that it's a sequel to a game that I greatly admired in my adolescence. I'm just disengaged from the actual playing of the game. And it's a video game, so gameplay really is important. I can't say Neo doesn't work because it works as intended, but that's the highest praise I can give it, and functional isn't really praise at all. For everybody else's sake, I hope you enjoy the gameplay more than me, because that's the thing taking me out of the experience. If you're a fan of the series, or if you're interested in the series at all, I still recommend giving Neo a shot, because there's so much fantastic content to unravel. And if you end up liking the gameplay, then you're in for a really weird, fun journey. But this one just isn't for me. Neo, The World Ends With You earns a 6 out of 10. Please subscribe, click the bell, and check out the videos on screen, including my dedicated Square Enix playlist. それでは、ごきげんよう、さようなら。